Here is the second question that is very, very important for me. And it's all about, forget about the technology for a moment, forget about the cool AI tool, the cool AI algorithm. And let's go back to a tech agnostic conversation around the use cases, right? So the difficulty that I see when interacting with clients is the need to understand out of those thousands and thousands of use cases that you can find out there, which one is going to be applicable to my environment. And I think this is something that is definitely of a challenge. That's why, by the way, we see a lot of demand for assessing the environment, discovering the environment to identify where to inject AI and where it makes the most sense. So, Paul, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's that it's understanding a baseline so you can then understand the potential improvement and then look at that from multiple outcomes, be that predictability, be that security, be that time, be that money, right? It's understanding that. But we often see we try and define outcomes based on data and scientifically. So it stands up and gets scrutinized in a positive way by finance and IT stakeholders. But for me, we often see very, even if we put automation in a box for a second, we often see some very common use cases. I probably speak about joiners, movers, and leavers processes about 15 times a week. And that seems to be particularly for large organizations, particularly for organizations where they've got lots of contract staff going in and out. So that could be hospitals or whatever that may be. That is a critical use case. But where a lot of these projects fall down is people just look at a small component of the process. They don't look at the end-to-end process. And it's the end-to-end process that makes the time saving. So yeah, to give you some common use cases, it's joiners, movers, leavers. It can be some business process such as reporting or data aggregation. OG, you and I talk a lot about horizontal workflows, so finance and HR workflows. Just taking away that 8, 10, 20 hours a week of admin just by pulling lots of information together in one place. That, for me, that's pretty common. IT operations, daily checks, or predictable secure deployments of resources. That could be a VM, it could be an object store, it could be an entire application. And then if you dive more into AI, you've got areas that some people look at, is it AI or is it automation? We try and look at things like data and analytics, probably a little bit more towards automation because we want that certainty. We're always a bit nervous around data where you get hallucinations and you've got varying temperature settings with the AI. So, but then we look at things like with things like LLM models. We're looking at chatbots, as you mentioned before. It could be adding context and content to ticketing systems. The list goes on. But for us, there's probably a core set of about 30 or 40 outcomes and workflows that are reasonably common across most businesses.
Yeah, definitely. So that typically the difficulty here, and if I look at it a little bit of a macro level, right, the difficulty is to identify those use cases that are going to be best for a given environment, right? There's some use cases that are frankly things that we see everywhere, and some companies are running behind, and they have to have that just to be on par with the rest of the competition. For example, in an HR department, you have to have something for onboarding an employee, offboarding an employee. You need to have a chatbot to answer the regular questions that are coming from employees. In the IT space, you need to have some capability to automate some of the issues, some of the requests. So those are very typical use case that you have to have. And if you don't have it yet, you're probably running behind. And then there's a number of other use cases that are more, how can I build extra IP? How can I leapfrog the competition? How can I inject an algorithm, for example, that will allow me to predict something that the rest of the competition cannot do, right? So it's pretty much twofold. the use cases that everyone is doing that if you don't do, you are running behind. And then the use cases that are going to be more IP related, where you're trying to do something that is fairly unique and differentiate yourself. And you got to do both, right? You got to do what everyone does and do it right, so you don't run behind. And you got to identify where you want to have that that IP created, so that you can do something that is better, potentially cheaper, faster than your competition, right? And if we look at the whole landscape of a company, whether it's what I would call front end processes, marketing, sales, support, back end processes, IT, HR, admin, or even your product and services, those are the area that you have to scan and identify where you want to inject the use cases, right? And that is, for some companies, a challenge. It's not easy to know where to start, right? So again, hundreds of use cases, many of them have good track records and demonstrating real ROI. Some are a bit more at the edge of the technology, bit more trying to grab the IP, and many things we see here. And my advice is to try to stay to core to a number of principles, right? And let me quickly touch on that. Principle number one is a notion of size, right? Notion of size of impact. When you are trying to identify where to put your use case, you are trying to understand how big the impact will be, right? And notion number two is to also understand your environment, to see how friendly your environment is to a use case, so you can assess how much effort it is. So bottom line, hundreds of use cases, potentially thousands of use cases, new one coming in on a daily basis across, front end, back end, product and services. It's a little bit of an overwhelming situation for some people. And again, many people are here to help. That's what we do on a daily basis.